Hi, my name's E Lim. I am the Program Director of AAAF, or I was, for the runoff in general in 2020. Um, Honestly, the ways that different communities of color came together in the runoff, that's something that's been happening for a while now, for at least 10 years, honestly. I mean, the only reason we got there was because of that, right? Because all of us took responsibility for moving our own towards this greater goal of making Georgia potentially a less horrible place to live, right? Because we care a lot about the people who live here. Started with the Asians for Abrams campaign back in 2018, right? So Stephanie Cho and I started that campaign, started the C4, because we recognize that it's very important to show that Asian Americans are showing up in this way, right? It's what you said, right? A lot of people don't know how to plug into these spaces because they, as Asian Americans, don't know where they fit, and are like afraid, honestly, of messing up, right? Or misstepping, which is valid. So we kind of started that campaign as a model almost, or at least a space where people could explore how they wanted to like join the battle, right? Or join the struggle. It was also about like Black and Asian solidarity, honestly, like showing up for Abrams in the way that we did because Abrams had showed up for us so hard for years before that. So taking that spirit with the Asians for Ossoff and Warnock campaign, we wanted to make it that, but bigger. So Aisha Yaqub actually came on board as the director back in 2019, I want to say, and then spent like the next year building it up, and getting it the budget it needed in order to have like the level of exposure we needed to have. I think, yeah, like honestly, it's like a really big part of our strategy is literally just like, hey, we're here, progressive Asians exist. Like if you're one, you don't have to be afraid. There's a space for you. And if you didn't know we existed, we do, right? It was kind of just like, it's about carving out a space for ourselves, right? And doing it in a way that is generative and collaborative, and adds to the conversation instead of like taking space in it.
It's really striking to me when you say like you and Stephanie Cho, right, together started the Asians for Abrams campaign. Like both of you happen to be queer and trans Korean people. And so I'm wondering like, I'm a New York City based organizer, and I see also a lot of leadership from queer and trans Koreans here as well. And so I'm wondering if you have just any thoughts about like what that's about, or like what role is it that we as like queer and trans Koreans play in this work.
I mean, I think it's always been true of movement spaces broadly is like the most revolutionary work is being done by the people on the margins, and the people on the margins are the queer femmes, right? Like queer femmes of color, in our case, queer Korean femmes, queer and trans. And I mean, that's just kind of what, like how it happened, right? Like basically every radical movement happening in Atlanta right now is being headed by a queer femme. And so it was only appropriate that that's how it happened with us. And I think, I mean, it just makes the most sense to me, right? Just because like queerness is inherently, maybe not always in practice, but inherently in theory, like liberatory, right? It's about expanding, instead of setting boundaries, and enforcing boundaries in a way that makes us feel safe with one another, right? And like, I feel like those are things that are critical in movement building, right? And those are things that you bring to the table almost intrinsically by being queer, right? Or at least queer is like a political identity, I suppose. Queer Koreans do not necessarily fit into, honestly, at all sometimes, the norms of what a Korean ought to be, right? Like, we're kind of thrown into the journey towards some kind of liberatory space from the get-go, right? Like, we already failed at this thing, so let's try and figure something else out, right? And then other people in watching that realize, like, oh, I don't like these norms either, right? Like, this is bullshit. I want to co-create something for myself too. And then that's kind of how movement building has happened for quite some time, actually, but particularly here.
What are your personal hopes for this co-creation as we enter the new year, or just like where you are in your life right now?
Honestly, I'm really, really excited to see how like the coalitional politics grow at this point, right? And also just like how the grassroots organizing in the queer Asian spaces and even just, you know, the API spaces happens. Like, we have developed like an amazing space for QTBIPOC and these last, I want to say, like, well, it's always existed, but it's really been thriving in this last decade. And in the Asian American community in particular, right? Like, we just started like the second ever executive board for our Queer Asian chapter here. Like, things are budding, right? Like, everything is nascent. There's just so much potential and possibility. And like, the politics in the South feel different from the ways that I've felt them in, you know, the Northeast, for instance, or in more progressive territories, right? Like, when you're in the South, like, you really have to go in on your beliefs if you want to win. And so like, when you're organizing with people here, like, there's this beautiful mix of like intensity and urgency and like almost a desperation, right? Towards liberation and joy, right? Because like, I think so many of us realize, like, especially in the South, if we want to actually win the battle, we need to survive the first one. So joy just became such a huge part of how we do organizing. And joy and those spaces like where we feel joy are honestly so amazing. Like, in non-COVID times, there's this thing called La Choloteca, right? And like, when you go, it's literally like a mix of everyone, right? Like, you have some straight folks, you have a shit ton of queer folks. It's basically just like a room of like a QT, BIPOC, beautiful myriad of sea of colors, whatever. And that's kind of what I'm excited to see grow, because that's also the space where you find like the radical organizers who are putting together like the shit that went down over the summer, right? Like, or any of the shit that happened in this past fall and winter, right? Like, I want a space that can be dedicated to liberation, not just through the struggle, but also in joy. And in doing so, like, creating that very world that we want in the now, right? And I think that's actually like how those politics are being built. So I'm just, yeah, really excited to see that piece of the political universe here expand.
Speaking of joy, I will say that I was able to see your fellow KQT in Atlanta, Tohyun. And then I found you on Instagram, and I found many joyful photos of both of you like making and showing off kimchi.
Yeah, exactly. And we're honestly all gonna hop on Zoom next week for Lunar New Year to make dumplings together. So